we're all doing life one way or another, whether we're in jail or whether we're on the streets. Top of the morning, and we're back for another LWOP conversation. Today is July 24th, 2026, which is an extremely important day because 1 year ago today, I was released from prison. I know I mentioned before I served 24 years of a life without the possibility of parole sentence. So to be 1 year removed from that is just, it's definitely an accomplishment. We talked to the fellas about coming home, but we also talked to them about staying home, because life definitely has its challenges, and navigating reentry definitely has its challenges, especially in the Inland Empire, where there are some amazing resources, but it's a lot less plentiful than in Los Angeles, California, and places up north. So I got up about 3:45 a.m. this morning, had a early morning drive, and I've just been reflective all morning about what I was doing on this day 1 year ago, all the nervousness and the anxiety that I was feeling, and one might not think it, but also the sorrow that I felt in my heart, and the feeling of what I now know as survivor's guilt, to be leaving so many of my close brothers behind that I had established these decades long relationships with, and to have them walk me to the gate and for us to part, not knowing when or if we see each other again. That was definitely something that I didn't anticipate on that day, and it was definitely something that hit pretty hard, right here in the rib cage. But coming home has just been an amazing journey. Thankfully, I was able to transition back into society much easier than I thought I would. I think much easier than those who received me thought I would as well. And I credit a lot of that to never allowing prison to become my natural habitat. I will say that at one point I did have to come to a place of acceptance that that could be my final destination, and I needed to start living my life now, in the moment, rather than my future or my life being predicated on something down the line, freedom, or my hopes for whatever type of life I wanted for myself. I had to start living my life there in the moment, and had I not done that, I don't believe that I would have learned how to walk in my purpose, which ultimately led to internal freedom. But that having been said, I was still very intentional about never allowing that place to become my natural habitat. And by that I mean, it's a common thing in prison for the fellas to refer to their cell as the house or the crib, and I never did that. My cell was always a cage to me, and at some point it became an office and a lab, but it was never home, and I never allowed myself to fall up under the illusion that that place was my home. So I think that by not allowing it to become my natural habitat, it made it that much easier and more seamless for me to come back home and get the swing of things. So reentry has definitely had its challenges. I think for me, um, by far, one of the biggest challenges is, balancing our expectation and our hopes of, what we intend to accomplish, our value system, which for me was coming home and prioritizing my education. And then, one of the things that was huge to me on my list was answering the call of the obligation and my commitment to my LWOP community, the community that I left behind. We entered into a freedom pact in 2021, which essentially stated that, we would all of us who signed our names on that pact would put forth the energy and the effort and the dedication and tenacity and grit, all those key ingredients that it would take to find ourselves on the other side of the gate. And should any of us get on the other side of the gate, that we would reach back for those who are still striving to get back home and acting like they're trying to get home. So that's something that I took to heart. I might as well sign that pact in blood, because I put my heart into my fight to get here. And now that I'm here, I'm putting my heart into creating a space for, my LWOP brothers and sisters, but not just LWOPs, brothers, sisters who got determinate life sentences, people who are serving determinate sentences. I want to be sure that I'm able to create a lane that's adjacent to all these other organizations doing this great work. So this is one of the reasons why, even a little bit ahead of my timeline, we established the LWOP Foundation. And although institutional funding is not all the way underway yet, we do have the foundation of our foundation solid, and that's very important to me. So it's been a challenge trying to balance my hopes and expectations of myself with the reality of the world, coming home to gas prices that were sky high, so being mindful of the way that I'm moving in traffic, because I know I got to get back to the pump. And also coming home and reestablishing relationships with our loved ones and family. I have brothers that I've been knowing for the last 24 years that arguably know me better than my family at this point, who understand me, who understand the work that we're doing, who understand what it feels like to have left a permanent void in someone's world. And coming home and trying to establish these relationships with people, and understanding that some of them have just become relationships entitled, and that's a difficult reality to wrap your mind around, along with coming home to the realization that those who passed away while you were gone, that you might didn't really get a chance to mourn, the reality of approaching that grave site and seeing the consequences of a life well lived in some points, but also there's been some tragic losses along the way too. And just that reality that these people are no longer there. And that was pretty sobering to come home to. We've been talking about mental health, and I think it's important that we stay on that track as we approach August 19th, which I stated in RJD prison, Richard Donovan State Prison in San Diego, there will be a mental awareness event. Unfortunately, it's not an event that's open to the public, but it's something that so many people who are incarcerated are looking forward to right now. It's an event that, some people who have become dear friends to me, both on the inside and outside, are pouring their hearts into curating a really dope experience for, the incarcerated people, our community. And I want to talk about it because it's so important. Mental health is something that seems to be overlooked in many communities. Um, I think that it's been kind of taboo to admit that everything's not all right sometimes, and especially for those of us who are incarcerated, who pretty much have to keep our head up, shoulders back, keep your chin to the sky, keep the 10 toes down, and just kind of truck through whatever's going on in life. We tend to carry this baggage or carry this weight on our shoulders and don't even realize it at sometimes. And even if we do realize it, you look around and everybody else has their own set of circumstances and their own problems to deal with. So who do you unpack to? Yesterday I spoke a little bit on relationships and how they affect us as incarcerated people, and how everything can be intensified times 100. Feelings of distrust, insecurities, jealousy, control. These are all hallmarks too of domestic violence. A lot of people don't realize that domestic violence goes above and beyond just being physically combative with somebody. It also goes to emotionally, financially, just trying to exercise power and control over someone. And oftentimes, as incarcerated people, with so much that is outside of our control, we try to wield our control over another human being, a partner, someone who loves us. And it's an unhealthy and toxic way to relate to someone, but it's also the byproduct of an unhealthy mental condition. I was thinking yesterday about the many times that something was bubbling or brewing in the prison, right? Especially once I had made changes, especially after transformation had occurred for me on a personal level. But at the end of the day, I'm still in prison. I'm still subject to all the, the whims of prison. Prison has a lifeblood of its own. It's got a pulse. And when you've lived within that confined space for so long, you're able to tap in and you're an extension of that. So, it's easy to hit the yard and immediately recognize that something's not right. When we're used to seeing, it look like out there in the projects, right? Everybody gathering, doing whatever it is that everybody does, but it's quick. It's easy for you to, it's almost instinctive or intuitive that you could just immediately sense when something is not right. And a lot of times when those things are, bubbling and brewing, especially once you've identified that no longer can you afford to pay the consequences of these bad decisions, it creates an element of stress, and it wears heavily on our mental health. And it's unfortunate that, unless you realize that it really serves no benefit to stress over things that are beyond our control, because if they happen, then you're going to experience that stress twice. You're going to stress whether or not it's going to happen, what the outcome is going to be, is there a way to avoid it, is this something that I should meet head on? And then oftentimes it doesn't even happen. So you experienced all the physiological and psychological damage that comes from stress in that situation. But then if it does happen to happen, now you got to deal with it twice. So one of the things that I was really trying to work hard on, especially when I became aware of my own mental health, was not allowing the things that are beyond my control to weigh me down. It's a lot easier said than done, but I think it's something that once you become aware of, then you can try to start exercising it. And I think a lot of the brothers and sisters who are incarcerated may not have become aware of it, so I think it's something that's important to talk about. We all have agency. We are all empowered in whatever circumstance is going on around us, because we have the power of choice, how we respond to it. So Um, just because something is happening in the prison doesn't necessarily mean that it's a you thing. Um, we all have a choice. As hard as some of those choices may seem, we got to start exercising that bigger picture thinking. What is my bigger picture? What's most important to me? And then holding whatever's going on in contrast to that bigger picture and seeing, is it worthy of disrupting or potentially fucking off, excuse my language, the bigger picture for the matter at hand. And if it's not, then we got to prioritize that bigger picture and keep it moving and stay true to our goal. So may not seem like all those things fall into the orbit of mental health, but it is, because these are the things that we obsess over in prison. Yeah, I think it's very, very important that we start talking about these things and creating a space for our loved ones and family members who are incarcerated to be able to convey that. I know I try to treat my 15-minute phone calls like an opportunity for all my family members to share with me. It wasn't a time for me to call and unpack. It wasn't a time for me to ask for things. It was a time for me to give someone an attentive ear and actively listen to what was on their heart and their mind. But I do think it's equally important that those relationships be mutually beneficial, and that our loved ones who are calling from prison have an opportunity to get some of those things off their chest. That's why I look forward to receiving those phone calls and pressing five, so that my loved ones get space to be able to get some of those things off their chest, to lighten their burdens a little bit, and improve the condition of their mental health and well-being. So yeah, let's talk about it. Let's continue to be mindful. Mindfulness is very, very empowering. One of the LWOP brothers that I respect, to the utmost, Stephen Green. He's one of the people who was at the tip of the spear as far as LWOPs coming home. And I don't want to misquote him, so I'll paraphrase, but I know he said that trauma that is not transformed is transmitted. So we got to take some time to wrap our minds around that. Those things that we leave unaddressed, those traumas that we are not mindful of, those things that go unchecked are ultimately the things that we continue to pass on like heirlooms. Those are the things that keep us in that destructive cycle, and those are the things that we have to transform. We have to turn that pain into something powerful. We have to use our stories to the benefit of other human beings, and especially those of us who have trudged the path before. We gotta expedite the growth as much as we can, because growth is something that does happen in stages, but we definitely have to empower those with the information and the wherewithal to be able to make, better decisions for themselves and their mental well-being, no matter where we're at. We're all doing life one way or another, whether we're in jail or whether we're on the streets. Some of the worst things that can happen to any of us is losing our loved ones and family that we care so much about, and those eventualities are going to happen no matter what side of the gate we're on. So our mental health and our well-being, and making sure that people are mindful of how to get to a healthier space is definitely important to this team sport called humanity, and it's definitely in the interest of public safety. So yeah, I feel like I'm rambling, but I just wanted to take the time to, on my 1-year anniversary, reflect a little bit on some of the challenges that I've had so far, re-entering into society, and then keep it in that vein of mental health, which I feel we should do throughout the month of August up to August 19th, the event, and onward. Let's continue to have these conversations. Any questions, anything that people feel is a worthy discussion or worthy of discussion, throw it in the comments and we can definitely dialogue on it. So all my community that's traveling with me on this journey, that has the heart to have these discussions, continue to walk with me, and thankful and appreciative for anyone who took the time to share space with me and hold court this morning. Have an amazing day.